What's up, guys? Ballin with Blizzy back for another Circa Survivor breakdown. This time, week 5 upon us. We're going to take a look back at week 4, talk about the mishap of the Rams on Thursday night, and give you my strategy and selection officially for week 5. So let's jump right in, starting with a look back at week 4. So as you can see here, 1,407 were officially eliminated. Most of those coming via the Chargers and the Packers. As I mentioned last week, I was off the Chargers. I said it could be a wild card type deal with Jackson Dart juicing up that Giants franchise, and that's exactly what happened. The D-line got to Herbert. The O-line for the Chargers suffered an injury, major injuries to Joe Alt, and that was pretty much all she wrote. Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterboot, the two rookies, led the way. Crowd was electric. Defense was buzzing. And the Giants held on to spring the upset, knocking out 784 who used the Chargers. And then Sunday Night Football, Packers, Cowboys. Packers defense looked absolutely abysmal. Went into overtime, had a chance, gave up 40. Really should never lose with that good of a defense when your own offense scores 40. But nonetheless, they gave up 40 to the Cowboys as big favorites, and that was their undoing. So all told, again, just over 1,400 eliminated. 12,404 survived to week 5 until last night. Of course, if you're watching this, you're probably already aware of the fact that the Rams are no longer in the contest. And this is the big joke. It's all of us. It's me. It's you. Anybody who did not use the Rams. We're all wondering, what is the secret number of Rams entries? We're going to find out tomorrow night on VSiN Circa Survivor Reveal. You know, I'm hearing anywhere between 20 and 25%. I think that's a safe assumption. You know, probably going to come in around that 22, 23% range. Either way, you're looking at, you know, probably close to 3,000 of the 12,400 that made it to this week being out. So, you know, we're most likely under 9,500 entries still remaining in the contest. Obviously, it was a big clue to you all, I'm sure, when this video did not come out on Wednesday or Thursday morning, that I clearly was not on the Rams. We're safe. If you've been following along with my picks, the official picks that we've been tracking on my first entry so far through 4 weeks, we're scot-free. We're moving on to week 5. But again, let's dive in to week 5. Again, just a reminder, I was on the Texans. I officially recommended the Texans to you all last week. I said if you are going to diversify, my recommendation was the Patriots. Those two teams accounted for all of my entries, half on the Texans, half on the Patriots. We got through, no sweat, 26-0 win for the Texans at home against the Titans, and a 42-13 win for the Patriots at home against the Panthers. So we cruised, we didn't sweat, and we hope that that's the same result we're going to get this week. So let's jump over to the week 5 data grid over on Pool Genius. So the Detroit Lions come in as the biggest favorite on the week 5 slate. 10.5 points. 83% win odds according to the market, 84% win odds according to Pool Genius. And they get the Cincinnati Bengals on a short week after they got absolutely annihilated on the road in Denver. And quite frankly, appeared like they were giving up in the fourth quarter as they just continued to let J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey run free, you know, and run at will and stack up the yardage late in that game. Just completely embarrassing effort for the Bengals. So Detroit, 10.5 point favorite. Totally reasonable team to use, obviously. Minus 555 on the money line. Nobody else touching that this week. Just not happen to be for me because, again, they play on both holiday slates. And that's something that I think is very important to keep in mind, even though they're not the largest of favorites on either Thanksgiving or Christmas. The Rams, as we talked about, they lost. Unfortunately for the people who picked them, but we are all eager to see just how many use them, how many people are out. This says 19% projected by Pool Genius. Again, like I said, I'm assuming it's in that 22 to 23% range from what I can gather, according to, some different data that I've seen and some different estimates. Buffalo, 7.5 point favorites. Totally reasonable play to use in a portfolio. If you want to mix them in, I think I would encourage you to do so, because if you've been following the entry that I've been recommending and you've used the same 4 teams that I have, that means we stayed off them Thursday night, week 3 against Miami as double-digit favorites. That means we stayed off them week 4 at home against the Saints as double-digit favorites. And there's only going to be so many spots you can use them. And the thing is, this number right here, this is key. If not many people are using them this week, that's all the more reason to use them, and then just hope for upsets on these larger percentage numbers, right? You're hardly ever going to get a team coming in as 7.5 point favorites, particularly at 5% ownership when they're not even playing on the holiday slates. You might see this if there's a team that people really want to use on one of the holidays, but for Buffalo to not be playing on either Thanksgiving or Christmas and then being 7.5 point favorites and only catching an estimated 5% ownership, I would definitely consider mixing them in this week. Arizona at home to Tennessee, 7.5 point favorites, minus 415 on the money line. They're obviously clearly projected to be the most popular pick of the week, and I quite frankly don't see any issue with that. And then you've got Indianapolis, 7 point favorites at home. They're going to catch nearly a quarter of the entries. Expected to use them as well. Las Vegas is a wild card to me, so it's kind of interesting because, yes, 7 points encapsulates 7 points, right? They're expected to win. They're obviously considered a much better team than the Raiders. But I kind of, I find the Raiders to be a wild card. Ashton Jeanty started to play better last week, scored 3 touchdowns, his really first breakout of his NFL career early on in his rookie season. Geno Smith leading the NFL in interceptions, which is not good at all. But he's shown an ability to, to spray the ball around and really have games where he just catches fire. He hasn't done that this year yet, but, he has shown that back in his Seattle days. Brock Bowers, expected to play, but he hasn't looked his healthiest. Jacoby Myers, always a threat. Again, if Jeanty can keep it rolling, Dante Thornton, a speedster. So this game's really interesting to me. I think Indianapolis is rightly favored, but they're kind of a weird team. They should have probably beaten the Rams on the road last week. They didn't. They had some miscues at the end. And then Daniel Jones just hasn't looked quite as good as he did those first 2 weeks of the season. So, you never know what you're going to get, but this is an interesting spot for Indianapolis. Seattle at home against a banged up Tampa Bay team, just 3.5 point favorite. So I'm not sure this is for me, and it doesn't matter anyways because we already used them week 3 and we're going based off my entry number 1. Philadelphia, a holiday team for me. Kansas City, a holiday team for me. Minnesota and Cleveland. Minnesota has their entire offensive line except for one guy, Christian Darrisaw, out. So, I don't know how you could in good faith use Minnesota against one of the best defensive fronts in Cleveland. I know Cleveland's starting Dylan Gabriel, his first career start, but just you talk about 4 backup offensive linemen playing the Cleveland front. That's just a total stay away from me. And then we get down to the 3s, the 2s, the 1s, the pick'ems. You guys know that I don't venture down that far. So it's really this clear top 5 names for me. So let's jump over to the season planner and let's base this off my entry number 1 and kind of talk through what we're looking at. So Detroit, as I mentioned, the most likely team to win. LA has already lost. We stayed off of them. Just kind of a weird one where it was a divisional game. Shanahan and McVay are extremely familiar with each other, dating back to, their days as assistants, both on the Washington staff. And as I've already mentioned, week 9 was always kind of the spot for me to use the Rams anyways, at home, coming off a bye, getting a New Orleans team that is a bottom 2 team, basically according to any NFL power rating system that you look at. It's basically the Titans and the Saints as the 2 worst teams. Although the Saints, I think, are a little bit better than the Titans because they've shown themselves to be more formidable. Yes, they got killed by Seattle, but then they turned around and hung in there against Buffalo last week. So week 9 was always a spot for me. I never really gave the Rams much consideration. I know it was a popular thing to do once San Francisco ruled out all those guys, but you're talking about that familiarity between coaching staffs, and Shanahan had a brilliant game plan and they were able to hang on in the end and win Buffalo, like I said, I would mix in if you don't want to go heavy on just one team this week. Again, you're going to catch the 77% win odds at what seems to certainly be single-digit ownership. Arizona, I like. In Indianapolis, I kind of told you that I am staying off of this week, and really more specifically because I just love this week 8 spot for them more than I like this week 5 spot for them. And so my official recommendation is going to be the Arizona Cardinals. I think the important reason to use them is not only are they 7.5 point favorites, but they're on additional rest after playing Thursday night against the Seahawks in week 4. And then, you're talking about coming off 2 narrow losses at the end of games. Lost on that last second field goal in week 3, came back and then lost in week 4, same kind of deal. And so I just think you're catching the Titans coming cross country. You're catching the Titans, when you're already an angry football team having lost 2 straight. You're at home, you have the additional rest. And then I think, if I'm really going to lean into narrative street, I think, yes, could this be a letdown spot? Could people say any given Sunday? Of course it could, right? But I think coupled with these 2 losses, coupled with the fact that they're, at home off that extended rest, they just watched their division, rivals, the Rams, lose as a 9-point favorite. So if there was any more wake-up call that you needed to not lay an egg at home against the league's worst team, this was your wake-up call right here. Your division rivals were 9-point favorites. Your other division rivals were 9-point dogs. The Niners, they went in, caught the Rams sleeping, and they beat them, right? You can't let that happen. Full attention. I think their full attention is on Tennessee. I think they're going to get right this week. They're at home. And then I think the other thing you got to keep in mind too is so many people already used the Cardinals, right? Tons of people used them week 1 out the Saints. Tons of people used them week 2 home to the Panthers. So those people have a natural leg up anyways because they already have gotten through with an Arizona team that, as you can clearly see, does not have much more green anywhere on the rest of their schedule. In fact, they're only favored in 2 games currently. Week 12, barely favored against Jacksonville. Week 16, barely favored against Atlanta. So you're not going to catch this spot, extended rest, just a perfect spot for them to get right coming off those 2 losses. So they are my official pick for you all this week. And then, as I kind of do each week, just telling you guys kind of why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking. We can kind of fill out the rest of this stuff where I'm leaning right now. I love this spot for Green Bay at home against the Bengals, coming off 2 disappointing results, losing at Cleveland, tying at Dallas. You get the bye, you're going to get refocused, and you get one of the league's worst team without Joe Burrow. Week 7, I really like this spot for Chicago, but if we need to pivot, there is some other options here. Week 8, I just told you, love this spot for Tennessee, for an Indianapolis team welcoming in Tennessee, who they already battered on the road week 3. Week 9 is the Rams for me. Week 10, I really like Buffalo in that rematch against the Dolphins. Week 11, you got 2 really strong home favorites. They're going to be likely 6 to 7 point favorites. You got Pittsburgh welcoming in the Joe Burrow-less Bengals, and then you've got Atlanta welcoming in a Panthers team when revenge should be on their mind after they got crushed 30-0 at Carolina in week 3. So I'm going to leave that open, but we have 2 good options there. Week 12, we talked about Detroit. Thanksgiving, we've talked about Philadelphia. Week 13, we've talked about this spot for the Chargers off the bye, rested at home, getting Vegas, who they've already beaten. Week 14, love this spot for Tampa at home against the Saints. Week 15, love this spot at home for a healthy Niners team by this point coming off their bye, home to the Titans. Week 16, 81% favorite in the Kansas City Chiefs. And then that would still leave us Washington through Christmas. So I've kind of given you guys that layout each week just to sort of not only explain my pick, but kind of the logic and the path moving forward. So I think we're in a really good spot with the Cardinals this week. I really like them for all the reasons I listed. And I like additionally just the fact that we're using teams like the Cardinals. We've used the Seahawks. We've used, the Patriots or the Texans. So we kind of have a lot of those home big guns still at our disposal as we move down the stretch. And of course, on those important holiday island slates. So let me know what you guys are doing. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my strategy and my official selection, the Arizona Cardinals for this week. Good luck to you all, and we'll talk to you again soon.